Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin.
It was just after dawn, the sun barely pushing itself over the horizon. The air was thick, salty, and hot, and I was in the middle of a crew drill on the deck of the Catherine, my cargo ship off the coast of Somalia. My team was sweating through the motions. Live fire training, mock rescues, the usual, when my satellite phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at it, expecting another check-in from HQ, but it was my mother. Her name flashing on the screen made my stomach tighten. I hit accept and pressed the phone to my ear, ready to hear the usual, "Hello, dear," in that soft, gentle voice. But instead, I was met with hysteria. "Julia, Tyler's gone. They've taken him. They..." Her words came out in a breathless, jumbled mess. It took a second to make sense of it. I could hear her sobbing now, choked with panic. The yacht. Off the coast. Pirates, Julia. They took him. They're asking for ransom. "Mom," I said, trying to cut through the noise, my voice calm, steady. The drill was still going on behind me, but all I could focus on was her, my mother, who sounded like she might collapse any second. "Slow down. Tell me exactly what happened. Who's with him? How do you know?" She didn't answer, just kept crying. That's when my brother Darren grabbed the phone from her. His voice was raw with frustration. "This is ridiculous. What are you gonna do, Jules? You're just playing pretend out there with your little security team. You can't fix this. They're talking ransom and you're just a glorified mall cop on boats, right? What can you do?" It was a line I'd heard 100 times from him, always mocking me, always belittling what I did. I breathed out slowly, forced the tension out of my shoulders. "Listen to me, Darren. No media, no politicians. Don't make a sound. Just send me all the details you have. Text them to me. I'll handle it." I ended the call before he could argue. Time to get to work. It wasn't the first time Darren had dismissed me like that. It wasn't even close. Growing up, I learned early on that what I did wasn't real work in his eyes, his construction empire. That was real, important. Me? I was just a joke. The first time I noticed it, I was maybe 14, sitting at the dinner table with my parents and Darren. Dad was talking about one of Darren's big deals, some project with million-dollar contracts and a new office building. Darren was soaking it in, nodding like he was the king of the world, and everyone was just so proud. Meanwhile, I was talking about my latest trip, getting assigned to a rescue mission off the coast of Djibouti, and all I got was silence. Mom had smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's nice, sweetie," she said, then quickly turned the conversation back to Darren and his real business. Years of that, hearing them praise his success while they ignored everything I did. It was like I wasn't even in the room. I couldn't make them see what I was doing, couldn't make them understand that the work I was doing was real. Life or death, real. How do you explain that to people who think private security is just a job for the bored and the underachieving? Thanksgiving one year, Darren had his usual smug grin on when he started in on me. We were all sitting around the table, everyone sloshed on wine, and he'd just wrapped up some long-winded spiel about the next phase of his big project in the city. I'd been gone for months, bouncing between ports, and I was ready to be home, ready to share the truth for once. But Darren wasn't interested in that. "So, how's the job, Jules? Still guarding tuna cans on the high seas?" He leaned back in his chair, flashing that grin, the kind of grin that told me he thought he was funny. The room went quiet for a second, but only a second. Mom chuckled softly, and Dad just shook his head, like they were in on the joke, like I was a silly little sister who didn't know any better. I felt the heat rise in my face. I knew the drill. No one at that table cared that I was doing maritime rescue ops, working with teams to track down weapons shipments, or intercepting human trafficking on the east coast of Africa. No one cared that I'd been through situations where life hung in the balance every single day. I wasn't the boat bouncer they made me out to be. I was a security director who ran high-risk missions for multinational corporations, governments, and sometimes the people who were too scared to ask for help. I looked at him, at that smug smile, and for a second, I just wanted to tell him what I really did. Really, really did. Tell him about the hours spent in the middle of the night, tracking smuggler boats through the Gulf of Aden, the long weeks on ships, the sweat, the gunfire, but it wouldn't matter. He'd never get it. Not in a million years. Instead, I smiled back. "Yeah, Darren, guarding tuna cans." I didn't let the anger creep into my voice. Didn't let him see how much it hurt. It wasn't worth it. I'd learned that the hard way. I'd been back home on leave once, and my parents had even suggested I get a real job. They thought I was broke, thought I was living off scraps. When they offered to help me out and put me on a path back in the States, I didn't bother to correct them. They had no idea what my salary was, or the security clearances I had, or the contracts I negotiated. I didn't even want to try explaining that world to them. The one where I got paid in lump sums that could make their heads spin, where I was in charge of operations that cost millions, where I got bonuses that dwarfed anything Darren had ever seen. What could I say to them? You don't understand. Of course they didn't. It was a world they couldn't even imagine, and I wasn't going to waste time trying to make them understand. The phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another text from Darren, this time with more details. I skimmed through it quickly, my stomach tightening with every word. Tyler, my 22-year-old nephew, had been taken while on a yacht trip with some rich friends near the Horn of Africa. Pirates boarded the boat. Standard stuff. But then there was the twist. There was talk that this wasn't just about ransom money. The boat might have been used for surveillance. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Surveillance. Why? I stared at the screen, a dozen different thoughts racing through my head. I knew how this would go if I let the wrong people get involved. The FBI. They'd take their time. The embassy. They'd bungle the entire thing. The media would get wind of it, turn it into a circus, and Tyler would be worth a lot more as a bargaining chip than a hostage. Number. This needed to be handled quietly, fast, and it needed someone who understood the terrain, the players, and the risks. I didn't hesitate. I pulled up the contact list on my sat phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't spoken to in years. Paul Chavez, ex-Navy, now a maritime intelligence officer with Interpol. We'd worked together on a couple of sensitive cases in the past, mostly arms smuggling and pirate activity along Africa's eastern seaboard. We trusted each other, and he didn't deal with politics or media. He dealt with results. I tapped out a quick message, using the secure code we'd set up years ago for exactly this kind of situation. Tyler hostage, Gulf of Aden, suspected surveillance operation, need support, coordinate with local assets. You know the drill. I waited, watching the screen, feeling my pulse quicken. It wasn't a long wait. A few minutes later, the response came through, short and to the point. Hang tight. I'll get you coordinates and comms. Sit tight. My hands were already moving, though. There wasn't time to wait for him to work his magic. We had a mission to finish. I looked up at the crew who were finishing up their drills, oblivious to the chaos happening a world away. We were escorting a tanker to Port Said, and it was going to take all my focus to get through it. But Tyler's face kept creeping into my thoughts like an itch I couldn't scratch. He was my responsibility now, and I couldn't afford to let that distract me from the mission at hand. I shot a quick text to my security team, instructing them to remain alert and keep a sharp eye on anything that seemed out of place as we moved through the waters. The job was still the job, even with the weight of my nephew's kidnapping hanging over me. The tanker was going to need my full attention. There were pirates in these waters too, and if we weren't careful, we'd end up in the same situation as Tyler. As we made our way closer to the Suez, I paced the deck, my mind divided. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Paul. He'd already worked the system, pulled some strings, and sent me coordinates. I've got eyes on the ground. Local comms are up. You're good to go. I didn't bother thanking him. Not that I didn't appreciate it, but this wasn't about gratitude. This was business. I was already pulling up the data, preparing to reach out to the right people on the ground. I'd need boots on the ground soon enough, but for now, I needed to keep my head in the game with the tanker. The crew didn't notice how much of my attention was focused on the coordinates Paul had sent me, or the fact that my fingers kept tapping out texts as I moved around the deck. It was the job, and the job always came first. There would be time for family later. Right now, I had to make sure that Tyler came home safe. The phone rang again, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet of the bridge. I didn't need to check the screen to know it was Darren. My jaw tightened as I swiped the screen to accept the call. Julia, have you done anything yet? His voice was frantic, tight with panic. I could practically hear him pacing, rubbing his hands over his face. I kept my tone even, trying to stay grounded. I'm working on it, Darren. You just need to sit tight and let me do my thing. His voice rose. Sit tight. You think I'm just supposed to sit here and wait? I've got lawyers on the line, reporters. Hell, I even talked to a former senator about this. We're going public, Julia. This is real. I closed my eyes, fighting the frustration that was threatening to boil over. The last thing I needed was for him to make noise about this. Every word he said made it harder. No, going public will only make Tyler more valuable to them. You don't get it. I don't get it. He laughed, the sound harsh. What do you know about this kind of thing? You're just, what? Some glorified rent-a-cop. His tone dripped with condescension, like he was speaking to a child. It took everything in me not to snap back. He wasn't hearing me. He never did. But this time, my patience cracked. I know what it's like to get someone out alive, I said, my voice steady but cold. I've done it before. You think your lawyers or reporters are going to do that? You think a senator's going to swoop in and make some magic happen? Number, that's not how this works. There was a beat of silence on the other end, followed by a deep, shaky breath. He sounded like he was trying to steady himself, but the panic in his voice was unmistakable. I don't care what you say. I'm not just sitting here. I cut him off. Darren, no press, no calls, no money. Just sit tight and let me do my job. He started to argue again, but I ended the call. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep trying to explain to him how dangerous his ignorance was. I set the phone down and pulled up the intel Paul had sent me. Tyler and 2 of his friends were alive, at least. That was the one thing I could hold on to. They were being held in a coastal village, and there was a militia watching over them. A militia with known smuggling ties. That was the key. If they were part of a smuggling ring, they weren't just out to make a quick buck. They had an agenda, and that made things a hell of a lot trickier. I ran my finger over the map, tracing the coordinates Paul had provided. The village wasn't far from where we were, but getting in there was going to take more than just a boat. It would take coordination, local support, and a hell of a lot of caution. I needed to move fast, but I couldn't rush. Not with Tyler's life on the line. The tanker was still on course for Port Said, and I had to be there when it docked. My team was still running drills below deck, but my mind was somewhere else, focused on the next step. I had to keep it together. I couldn't let Darren's panic, or anyone else's, throw me off track. But as the hours passed, I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. Tyler wasn't just some kid on a vacation. He was family. My family. And despite everything I'd done in my career, despite all the people I'd saved, I couldn't shake the thought that I might not get this right. Not this time. I took a deep breath, letting it out slow, one step at a time. By the time the tanker had docked in Port Said, I had already made the call. I'd pulled up the name I'd been hoping I wouldn't have to, but it was the only option that made sense. A private contractor I'd worked with in the past. Tough, ex-military, highly effective. His company wasn't a household name. They didn't make the news, didn't flaunt their work. They just got things done. I knew the guy, knew his crew, and I trusted them. More than I trusted anyone else. Actually, I dialed the number and he picked up on the first ring. Julia. You still owe me a favor, I said, cutting straight to the point. He chuckled on the other end, a low, rough sound. I owe you more than one, but let's hear it. I took a deep breath. I need you to deploy a team. Hostage recovery, off the coast of Somalia. Kidnapped kid. There's chatter, it's bigger than just ransom. This isn't a simple grab and go. I need someone who knows how to move quietly, but fast. There was a pause before he answered, his voice even. I got it. Where are we going? Near the Horn, a coastal village. The intel's sketchy, but it's the only lead I've got. I'll send you everything I have. He muttered something under his breath, then said, You know the risks, right? This isn't going to be clean. I don't need clean, I said, my eyes fixed on the horizon as the tanker slowly pulled into the dock. I need results. And I need this done yesterday. He let out a sigh. You've got it. You've worked this before. I know how you do it. Consider it handled, but you're going to owe me. I didn't argue. I wasn't in a position to haggle. I wired over the retainer from my own account. Didn't even think about asking the family for help. It wasn't their world, and they wouldn't understand. This wasn't about them anyway. It was about Tyler. As soon as the wire was done, I set to work, coordinating the operation from my ship's command post. I mapped out the route, the contact points, the local allies. I'd reached out to a couple of NGOs who ran safe corridors through the region, quiet groups who didn't ask questions, just moved people when they needed to be moved. I'd also made contact with the Yemeni Coast Guard, who'd been invaluable in these situations before. Their cooperation meant everything. Without them, I wouldn't be able to pull this off. I could feel the weight of the plan settling on my shoulders as I worked. It wasn't just about getting Tyler back anymore, it was about making sure no one got hurt in the process. No one, especially my team, would walk into a trap because of a half-baked plan. I turned to my crew, who had been moving around the ship, executing orders without question. They didn't ask for details, didn't want to know the story, they just did their jobs. And right now, I was grateful for that. I briefed them on what was coming, just enough to make sure they were ready. They nodded, some of them glancing at me with quiet understanding. They knew something was off. I knew something was off. But we couldn't stop now. By the time the sun began to set, I knew the team was already on the move. I hadn't told my family what I was doing, hadn't even considered calling them. Darren would have only made it harder. He'd have wanted to know every detail, and I couldn't afford that distraction. They were better off in the dark. They didn't need to know about the private contractors, the shadowy network of people I'd just activated. They wouldn't understand the stakes. Hell, they still wouldn't get why I was doing it. The evening stretched out, the air cooler now, the sky darkening over the Red Sea. I stood at the railing, watching the waves below. The tanker was docked, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing together the plan in my head, double-checking the route. Tyler was out there somewhere, and all I could do was push forward, one step at a time. The silence of the night felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath along with me. The team was on their way. All I could do now was wait. I landed in New York for the debriefs, but the weight of everything kept pulling me back to the mission. The city felt like it was in another life. Loud, hectic, nothing like the stillness I had on the ship. But I wasn't here for the noise. I was here to make sure things stayed on track. The contractors were already on the move, but that didn't mean I could afford to relax. Not yet. I didn't call my family. I let them stew in their anxiety, just like I had. Let them sit in the mess they'd made, thinking their panic would somehow fix things. I was done being the emotional punching bag. Darren didn't waste any time. My phone buzzed with a string of texts. Aggressive, demanding. What's the embassy doing? They're stonewalling. Why isn't anyone helping? I read each message, the words cutting into me with that familiar blend of frustration and resentment. He had no idea what was really going on. No idea what I was doing behind the scenes. No clue how much I was risking to fix his mess. And all he could do was scream into the void, thinking that would change anything. Mom didn't text, but a voicemail popped up. I pressed play, hearing her ragged, panicked breathing before she even spoke. Julia, we didn't know who else to call. I don't know what to do anymore. Please tell me you're doing something. I closed my eyes, the weight of her voice sinking in. She didn't get it. She never would. Not after everything I'd done, everything I'd built for myself. She still thought I was just some screw-up. I rubbed my temples and let out a slow breath. I thumbed out a quick text to Darren. They'll be out soon. Don't screw this up. Then I set the phone down and took a minute. I needed to focus, not on their panic, but on the mission ahead. The team was getting closer, and I had work to do. Not 5 minutes passed before my phone rang again. Darren. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Julia. His voice was sharp, angry. What do you even do? You're not CIA. You're not even military. You're just a glorified rent-a-cop. What the hell do you think you're going to do here? I felt the anger flare up in my chest, but I kept my voice even. I do my job, Darren. I get people out alive. You're not even close to qualified for this kind of thing, he shot back. You've never been in the thick of it. You've never? Goodbye, Darren. I hung up, cutting him off before I said something I'd regret. He had no idea. He still didn't get it. Never would. But I wasn't going to waste my time trying to prove myself to him. Not anymore. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and turned my attention to the task at hand. I wasn't running point on this just for some family recognition. I was doing it because Tyler needed me. Because I could do it, and I wasn't going to let some idiot who didn't understand a damn thing get in my way. The call came just before dawn. My phone buzzed beside me on the table, the screen lighting up with a number I recognized. Paul Chavez. I picked it up before it had a chance to ring again, my heart pounding even before I spoke. Julia, he said, his voice low, but I could hear the satisfaction in it. We got them. Tyler and the others are out. I felt a wave of relief flood through me, so strong it almost knocked me off my feet. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been wound until I heard those words. They were safe. How? I asked, my voice tight. Night raid, no shots fired. Clean. We've got them in the custody of an Allied embassy in Oman now. Medical evals are happening as we speak. They're stable, alive. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. The tension in my shoulders bled away, and for the first time in days, I let myself feel the smallest bit of peace. They were safe, all of them. Paul's voice softened. Your nephew's lucky you were the one who got the call. I didn't say anything for a moment, just let his words hang in the air. The rest of the world might never know what had happened out there. The press would spin it into whatever story they wanted, probably make it sound like some kind of rescue operation done by the military, or the FBI, or someone with more official credentials than me. I didn't care. It wasn't about the credit, it was about this, getting them out. I need you to make sure everything stays quiet, I said. No media. I want Tyler listed as rescued by regional law enforcement. Nothing that connects it back to me. Nothing. I heard him exhale on the other end. You sure about that? I mean, it's a clean job, Julia. Not many people pull off a rescue like this, especially not with 0 casualties. I didn't hesitate. I'm sure. Just handle it. I don't want anyone looking at me for this. Not now. Not ever. He paused like he was considering pushing back, but then he just said, understood. I didn't care if it was clean. I didn't care if it made me look like a hero. I didn't need their praise. I'd lived my whole career without that. It was never about proving anything to anyone, especially not to my family. Not after everything they'd said, everything they'd made me feel. It was about something else entirely, proving to myself that I could do what they couldn't. Fix a problem, no matter how impossible it seemed. I stayed up for hours after the call, going through the details, double-checking with local authorities, confirming that everything was being handled as it should. By the time the sun had fully risen, the paperwork was done, the operation closed, and Tyler was safely out of harm's way. I didn't tell my family. I didn't call them, didn't text them. I wasn't even sure if I was going to. I'd done my part. They hadn't been part of it, not in any real sense. Darren had no idea the lengths I'd gone to, or how many people I'd quietly pulled into this operation. He probably still thought I was just playing rent-a-cop out on the water, missing out on whatever real life he was living. But that was fine. I didn't need him to understand. When I finally did text him, it was short and direct. They're safe. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I put my phone down and stared out at the city skyline, my mind already moving on. There was no victory lap for me, no congratulations, just the quiet knowledge that Tyler was home, safe, and I'd done what I said I would, and that was enough. It wasn't about being the hero. It wasn't even about getting it right for them. It was about doing it for him, my nephew, my family, the people who never understood what I did or why I did it. They still wouldn't get it, but I didn't need them to. I had made this happen, and in that moment, that was all that mattered. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house just after midday, the sun high and too bright for the kind of conversation I knew was coming. The place looked the same as always, well-kept, neat, the American dream tucked behind a row of maples. But there was something about the silence when I stepped inside that felt heavier than usual, like the air was thick with tension. Mom was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a tissue in her hand, eyes swollen from crying. She didn't even look up when I walked in. Dad sat in his chair across from her, his hands folded tight in his lap, avoiding my gaze. Neither of them had said much since the phone call. Darren was pacing back and forth in the hallway, phone in his hand, checking it like he was waiting for some miracle to appear on the screen. His face was pale, a nervous energy radiating off him that was hard to ignore. He looked like someone had sucked the life out of him. Mom, Dad, I said, keeping my voice steady. Tyler's safe. They both looked up, the relief visible in their eyes, but it didn't last long. Mom was the first to speak. What happened? How? How did you do this? She wiped her face, but the tears kept coming. I gave her a tight smile, the kind I'd perfected over the years. He'll be on a flight home tomorrow. Darren stopped pacing and turned toward me, his face twisting in disbelief. What? Who got through? Which lawyer, huh? Was it the senator? Which one of them pulled some strings to get him out? His voice was rising now, like he was ready to explode with frustration. I met his gaze without flinching. None of them, I said, my words clear, deliberate. It was mine. Darren let out a short, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head. Yours. What are you talking about? Your guys? You mean the boat security guards with binoculars. You're bluffing. He laughed again, louder this time, but the edge in his voice made it clear he wasn't sure if I was serious or not. I didn't smile, didn't try to explain it to him. I just stood there, calm, while the silence stretched between us. I knew better than to try and convince him. He wouldn't understand, not in a million years. And then, just as I was about to speak, Darren's phone rang. He hesitated for a second, staring at the number, before answering with his usual impatience. "Darren Graves," he said, his voice sharper than it needed to be. "Yes, this better be important." I was already turning to walk to the kitchen when I heard the faint, unfamiliar voice on the other end. "This is Officer Imani from the Foreign Liaison Team. Could I please confirm a few details with Director Graham?" I froze. The room was suddenly dead quiet. Darren's face went pale as he held the phone out in front of him, staring at it like it was about to explode. I could feel his eyes on me as he mouthed the word, "Director." His hand shook slightly as he turned back to the phone, clearly confused. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just stood there and waited for him to process what had just happened. Darren looked between the phone and me like he couldn't figure out what was real anymore. I walked back toward him, my voice as steady as I could make it. "I'll take that," I said, holding my hand out for the phone. His eyes were wide as he handed it over, still in shock. This can't be." I took the phone from him, smoothly slipping into the role I'd been trained for. "Director Graham," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "Director Graham," the voice on the other end said, confirming my title. "We have the final details for the extraction. Just need you to confirm a few things before we proceed with the transfer." I nodded, even though the person couldn't see me. "Go ahead," I said, slipping back into the professional calm I knew so well. Darren, standing beside me, was silent now. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't pacing. He was just still. When the call ended, I handed the phone back to him without a word. He didn't take it right away, just stared at me, his eyes searching for something, anything that made sense. But nothing did. I looked at him, my gaze steady. "Now you know," I said. "You asked for help. I gave it to you." For a long moment, no one said anything. Darren's face was a mix of disbelief and something else, something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't regret, not yet, but maybe it was beginning to dawn on him. "Julia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." I didn't know. I shrugged, not giving him the satisfaction of a response. That's the point. You never wanted to know. Mom was still crying softly in the corner, Dad staring at the floor, lost in his own thoughts. But me, I felt like I'd done what I needed to do. No thanks, no accolades, just the quiet knowledge that I had fixed the mess they couldn't even see. Darren started to speak again, but I cut him off. "It's done, Darren. He's coming home." I turned to leave, but he stepped in front of me. "Wait, Julia. Thank you, I mean it." I just nodded, not looking back. I didn't need to hear more. I didn't need anything from them. And I walked out of that house, knowing Tyler was safe and that I had done what they could never have imagined. I hung up the phone, the final post-rescue details confirmed and locked in. It was over. The operation was complete. Tyler was safe. The process of moving him through the system was underway. I made sure the transfer was clean, that all the lines were covered. The paperwork, the debriefing, it was all sorted, just like I knew it would be. I put the phone down on the kitchen table, the sound too sharp in the silence that had settled over the room. Darren stood there, still stunned, staring at the spot where I'd been standing moments before. Mom wiped at her eyes, but the tears didn't stop. Dad was, somewhere between disbelief and quiet resignation, his hands still folded in his lap like they were glued there. Nobody spoke for a long while. The weight of everything hung heavy in the room. Then, quietly, Dad broke the silence. "Director." I didn't respond right away. I was too tired to play the game, too tired to care about their shock. They had no idea how long it had taken, how many strings I'd pulled, how much I'd risked just to make sure Tyler came home safe. None of that mattered to them. Not before, and not now. Mom's voice followed softly, like she was scared to ask. "You never told us." I looked at her, my eyes steady. "You never asked." The words were simple, but they hit like a punch. Darren, still pale, was the next to speak. I'm sorry. I didn't know." I shrugged. I wasn't angry. I wasn't anything, really. It didn't matter anymore. That's the point. You never wanted to know. There was nothing left to say, no reason to explain. They'd never understand, not really. They could go on with their lives pretending I was just some boat security guard, while I went off to fix problems they never even saw coming. But today, I had fixed this one. I looked at Darren, who still hadn't said anything meaningful, his words nothing more than an attempt at something that felt like remorse. I wasn't here to be validated. I wasn't here for their thanks. I did what needed to be done, and that was enough. "He's your son," I said, my voice flat, no emotion in it. "That's why I did it. Not for you, for him." I turned toward the door, not looking back. I didn't need to hear their excuses, didn't need to wait for Darren to get a little braver with his apologies. I had nothing left to prove to any of them. Darren's voice cracked as I reached the door. "Julia, wait." I didn't stop. "Thank you," he said, softer now, almost like he believed it. "I mean it." I nodded, not bothering to look back, not even slowing down. It wasn't about him or any of them. I walked out of that house with the weight of everything I'd done still sitting on my shoulders. But it felt lighter, like I'd finally finished the job they couldn't even understand. And that was all that mattered. The drive home was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier the longer you sit in it. The car hummed along the road, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying everything that had just happened. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel victorious. It wasn't about that. What I did feel was relief. It wasn't like I thought it would be. No high fives, no congratulations. The weight of their judgment had been hanging over me for so long, and now it was gone, like a thick fog lifting. It felt lighter than I expected, lighter than I thought I'd ever let it. When I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment, the place felt too quiet. The walls of my apartment, small, impersonal, seemed to close in around me. I dropped my bag on the counter and stripped out of my jacket, the motion mechanical. The phone buzzed. My crew. "Your ship's being reassigned," the voice on the other end said. "Red Sea. We're moving out tomorrow. Back to work." I didn't flinch. "Got it. I'll be ready." No parades, no medals. Just another mission. Just another day. The same as always. I looked out the window at the city skyline, watching the lights flicker in the distance. People out there were going about their lives, clueless. I had been running global operations, pulling strings in places they couldn't even imagine while they mocked me for being single and underachieving. But now, they knew. Not that it changed anything for me. I hadn't needed their validation back then, and I didn't need it now. The job was always the job, and my place in the world had never depended on their opinions. I finished packing, moving through the motions without thinking. It was all routine, all normal. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't bother looking at it. I put the phone on silent, dropped it into my bag, and zipped it up. There was no time to dwell. There was work to do.